He's been balancing budgets and fighting the good fight in New Jersey. It's my pleasure to welcome the first of the presidential candidates to speak at Red State this year. He flew from Cleveland on 3 hours of sleep to be with you guys. Governor Chris Christie.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you all very much. It's very nice. Appreciate the welcome. And for a guy from New Jersey, it is a relief to be in a red state. I guarantee it. How do you operate in that kind of context? First, you operate in that context by making sure everybody knows exactly where you stand. They can't wonder if they can push you around, because if they wonder if they can push you around, they're going to try to push you around, and they're going to succeed in pushing you around. So how does that manifest itself? Think about what happened. I talked about this a little bit last night at the debate. When I became governor in January of 2010, we were 6 weeks away from not making payroll. New Jersey, which is the second wealthiest state per capita in America, was not going to make payroll for the first pay period in March of 2010. How'd that happen? Well, in the 8 years before I became governor, they raised taxes and fees 115 times at the state level. 115 different tax and fee increases. State spending in the 8 years before I became governor went up 56%. And as a result, all of us in this room would understand, guess what New Jersey's private sector job growth was for those 8 years? Zero. Literally zero net private sector job growth for 8 years, from 2001 to 2009. I had an $11 billion deficit that I inherited on a $29 billion budget. By percentage, the largest budget deficit of any state in America. And so when I came in, of course, the Democratic legislature said, we know how to fix the deficit. We've done this a number of times before. We just need to raise taxes. And they sent me a tax bill. Now, I said to them at the time, listen, I called them all in, because under John Corzine, my predecessor, go ahead, sure, I'm happy to hear that. Here's the good news, though, we beat him. Only in New Jersey, right? They closed down the government under Corzine because they couldn't agree on how much to raise the sales tax. But I'm not raising taxes. Well, they sent me the tax increase. I vetoed it. And we balanced the budget by cutting or eliminating over 800 individual programs in the state budget. We balanced an $11 billion deficit without raising taxes. And since that time, I have vetoed 5 income tax increases and 3 business tax increases. For the first time in a decade, the people of New Jersey have gone 5.5 years without a tax increase from the state because they have a governor who just won't do it. Eric mentioned that I'm pro-life, and I'm the first pro-life person to be elected to anything since Roe versus Wade in the state of New Jersey. First pro-life person to do it. And folks told me when I ran the first time that there was no way you could be a pro-life person and win in New Jersey. And it's just wrong. What the people of New Jersey want to know is what's in your heart and what you believe, and they want you to tell them the truth. And so I've stood on the front steps of the State House and spoken at the pro-life rally. And before any of this controversy happened in Washington, D.C., in my first budget, in June of 2010, we defunded Planned Parenthood, and I have vetoed it 7 times since then, sent by the legislature. Planned Parenthood gets no money, no tax money from the people of the state of New Jersey. As a father of 4, but also as a public servant. But I was just as disgusted by the video put out by Hillary Clinton. Because she's playing the old game, everybody, and we better be ready for it if we're going to win this election. She says Republicans are against women's health care. Well, let me tell you this. The #1 killer of women in this country is heart disease. The #2 killer of women in this country is breast cancer. None of what she's talking about has anything to do with that. And in my state, we spend hundreds of millions of dollars to make sure that every woman, and by the way, every man, has access through federally qualified health clinics to the type of cancer screenings, hypertension screenings, diabetes screenings that you need to be able to be healthy and survive. Let us not let her talk this way, but yet some of the folks in the race for president were unwilling to take her on directly. They talked about women's health care in a way that was ambiguous and kind of allowed her to be able to jump all over it. So when I saw her video, I was in my car going to the New Hampshire forum that we had on Monday night. And one of my staff showed me her video, and I said, after this forum tonight, we're doing a video to respond. And this is what I said to her, in essence, in the video. I looked into the camera and I said, Mrs. Clinton, this is not about women's health care, and you know it. Here's the question I want you to answer. Do you support Planned Parenthood's conduct in killing children in the womb in a particular way in order to maximize the value of their body parts for sale on the open market for profit? That's the issue. That's the question. I don't support that, and I looked in the camera and said to her, I answered the question, why don't you, Mrs. Clinton? And that's what we need to start talking about. Do not, please, let us not be apologetic for our position on life as conservatives. And because let me tell you, if you don't have to apologize for it in New Jersey, we shouldn't be apologizing for it anywhere else in America. And if I've been willing to stand up for the last 6 years in New Jersey and say I am pro-life, there's no excuse for our party not to be unapologetic about it anyplace else. Let me just say one other thing about being pro-life. Our party needs to define pro-life even larger than we're defining it. Because if we define it larger and truly the way we feel it and believe it, we're going to bring even more converts to our cause. Because you see, being pro-life is not just for the time in the womb. I suggest to you that that's the easiest time to be pro-life. They've done nothing to disappoint us yet. I say that as a father for sure. Being pro-life becomes harder after that. But see, we need to be pro-life for the 16-year-old drug addict on the floor of the county lockup, because that life's an individual gift from God as well. We need to be pro-life for the child who's stuck in a failing public school with parents who can't afford to give him options and a government controlled by the teachers union who continues to say no to letting parents choose where to educate their children. We need to be pro-life for that life as well. I'm for school choice in New Jersey, and I am for drug rehabilitation. And here's why. The war on drugs, as noble as its initial imposition was, has failed. We are watching young men and women and older men and women all across our country die from drug addiction. We're seeing it every day. I cannot imagine that there's not a person in this room who hasn't had a family member, a friend, a business colleague, a neighbor, a classmate who hasn't suffered from this. And this is not about your educational level or your socioeconomic status. It's not about what kind of family you've come from. We all make mistakes, everybody. We've all made bad judgments. We're all flawed. For some of us, though, those bad decisions lead to a lifetime of addiction. And so I want to just share one story with you, and then I want to use the rest of this time to take your questions. To show you that it can happen to anybody. I went to law school. I'm a recovering lawyer. And I'm 13 years in recovery as a lawyer, thank you. And I had a small study group, 6, 7 folks. We hung together all through law school. One of the guys in our group was the smartest one. And he became one of the editors of the Law Review. He was the first one of us to get a job. As we were graduating, he got a job at a big law firm in New Jersey. He was making the most money. He became a partner before any of us did at his firm. He married a beautiful woman who became a doctor. They had 3 beautiful daughters together. They bought this great house in the New Jersey suburbs. And on top of all that, he was the best looking of all of us. And he was a great athlete too. And he used to run 10, 12 miles a week. And when he was running, One day he hurt his back. And he went to the doctor, tried to get helped. And the doctor gave him Percocet. And about a year later, his wife called me and said, I need your help. I need his friend's help from law school. I kicked him out of the house. He's addicted. He's lying to himself. We need to do an intervention. So we did. We went and we did an intervention. And for the next 10 years, we did about 4 or 5 interventions. And he's in and out of rehab. He got divorced. He lost his job. He lost his license to practice law. He lost his driver's license. He spent all the money he had saved and then started to spend his retirement money. He lost the right to see his children. And finally, a year and a quarter ago, Mary Pat and I got the call on a Sunday morning that we've been dreading forever, that they found him in a cheap motel room with an empty bottle of Percocet and an empty quart of vodka, and he was dead at 52 years old. And when I went to that funeral and sat in the pew as governor of New Jersey, but his old law school classmate, next to his 3 daughters who no longer had a father, by every standard and measure of how we define success in this society, this guy had it. Great education, beautiful wife, wonderful home, healthy, wonderful children, great job, great salary. It all got stolen from him. Ladies and gentlemen, being pro-life means that we have to treasure and value every life that God put on this earth. And I'm for drug rehabilitation for everybody that we can get it for, because I want to save every life that we can possibly save. If we start defining our party as the pro-life party and the broader pro-life party that believes that every life is worth salvation and that every life is a precious gift from God, we will build an unbeatable majority in this country that not only will elect the next president, but will create a new sense of moral righteousness in this country that will teach our children and our grandchildren that every life has to be valued. That's why I'm running for President of the United States. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing, and now I want to take your questions. So let's take some questions.
Thanks very much. And I'm delighted he's able to return to the Red State Gathering this year as a candidate for President of the United States of America, the Senator from Florida, Marco Rubio.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Thank you. Everybody keeps talking about, oh, we have so many people running for president. I think we're honored to have so many good people running for president. As I pointed out last night, the Democrats can't even come up with one good candidate, so I think we're in good shape. So my first Red State Gathering happened to be the first one ever, the one 6 years ago. I remember it was here in Atlanta. I believe it was at a Hyatt or one of the hotels. It was a smaller gathering than this. And I was just a candidate for the Senate. Nobody knew a lot about me. And I was in a campaign that no one gave much of a chance. That wasn't so long ago. It was just 6 years ago, and time flies so quickly. And that's important because Eric has asked us to speak today about how we view this country by the year 2020. What will America look like 5 years from now? We look back just 6 years from now and see how much the world has changed in our country and our political process. And so we realize that the year 2020 will be here quicker than we even imagine. It's a really important question. I said it last night. I believe it with all my heart. This election has to be about the future because America has always been about the future. A nation proud of its history, without a doubt. But we have always been a nation of people that believe that as great as our history has been, an even greater future awaits. And if there's anything that troubles me is that that sense seems to have eroded. So let's start by laying out some perspective. Yes, our country faces extraordinary challenges, important challenges, as it always has. But what country in the world would you trade places with? What nation on earth would you rather be? What people would you trade places with? The last time I checked, there weren't boatloads of American refugees washing up on the shores of Brazil. And Brazil's a bad example. They need any country for that matter, on the shores of the Bahamas or Jamaica, well, maybe on vacation, but this is still a great country. It really is. What troubles us is it can be even greater. What troubles us is that it's not fulfilling its potential, and we know that it isn't, because we feel it in our everyday lives. Why is that happening? The answer to that question will answer what this country needs to look like in 2020. Here's reason number one. The economy is rapidly transforming. 10 years ago, there would be no red state. 10 years ago, many of the people who influenced the political process would not be in business. You had to work for a major syndicate, or you had to work for a big newspaper if you wanted to give your opinion. That alone gives you an example of how much the world has changed. But let's go further. I pointed out this last night in the debate. The largest retailer in the world owns not one single store, Amazon. The largest ground transportation company doesn't own a single car, Uber. The largest hospitality company, Airbnb, doesn't own a single hotel, much less hotel room. This is a different economy. So not only is the world different, it is changing faster than it's ever changed before. So the question for America is, are we going to be left behind by these changes, or are we going to influence them? Are these innovations going to happen here, or are they going to happen somewhere else? And they've been disruptive. Many of the jobs that once sustained families are either gone, replaced by a machine, or they don't pay what those jobs once paid. I understand they've been disruptive. And it makes our people feel insecure about today and fearful of the future and what it means for their children. But the new economy holds the promise of creating jobs to replace the old jobs that actually pay more. The question is, will those jobs be created in America in 2020? Or will they be created in China? Will they be created in America or in India? In America or in Canada? That's the choice we have to make. Now, I will tell you that in making that choice, we remember that big government has never been a good idea, ever. But you could get away with it to a certain extent in the 20th century because we didn't have that much competition. Half the world was communist. The other half was struggling. And America was the one place on earth where you could do business. That's not the case anymore. We now compete with dozens of developed economies, all trying to be like us. And so the first question that will decide what this nation looks like in 2020 is, will we or will we not be the best place in the world to create the best jobs of the 21st century? And that's where the opportunity lies for the conservative movement. You see, if we want to be the best place in the world to create those jobs, it starts with a tax code that makes us the best place in the world to create those jobs. So, that's why we want to lower taxes on all businesses, especially small businesses. That's why we want to have a tax code, thank you very much. That's why we want to have a tax code that says the more people you hire and the more you invest in your company, the less you'll owe the IRS. That's why we want a tax code that says if you're an American company and you have millions of dollars overseas that you made in another country, we want you to bring that money back and we won't double tax you. That's why we want tax reform, because it makes us the best place in the world to create those jobs. That's why we want regulatory reform. We want regulatory reform because we know the more regulations, the less innovation. The more regulations, the harder it is for someone to start a business out of the spare bedroom of their home. You want evidence of that? For the first time in 35 years, we have more businesses dying than we do businesses starting. That doesn't sound like America, and it doesn't sound like our potential. But if we reduce regulations, we can change that. And we have devastating regulations. One was just issued on Monday of this week. It basically created this carbon mandate out of the EPA. And you know what that's going to do? It's going to make everything in America more expensive, not the least of which is starting a business. But you know who it really hurts? The people who are trying to make it. If you're a rich billionaire in California who feels guilty because for years and years you were a polluter, maybe you can afford a $1,000 increase in your utility bill. But if you're a single mother raising 2 children in Atlanta or anywhere in this country, and your utility bill goes up by $50, that's catastrophic. And that's what these radical environmental policies are doing to America and are doing to our economy. And that's why we need to reverse that decision from the EPA. The third thing we need to do if we want to lead the world in the best new jobs by the year 2020, we have to lead the world in energy production. We have been blessed with oil and natural gas and abundant resources. We need to fully utilize them. And if we do, we will create a manufacturing renaissance in America. If we do these things, I don't want to burn too much time, so let me hurry up. If we do these things, we will lead the world in creating the best jobs of the 21st century. And that reminds you of why this country so desperately needs limited government and free enterprise. Because only limited government and free enterprise can make these things possible. We can lead the world in the best jobs of the 21st century, jobs that pay more than the jobs that are going away. Yes, we won't have as many cashiers taking your order at the fast food restaurant. Your order is going to be with a touch screen. But the good news is the people that installed that touch screen, maintain that touch screen, and one day will replace that touch screen, they make a lot more than the cashier did. Which reminds us of the second challenge that we face, and that is the best new jobs of the 21st century are going to require more skills than the jobs of the 20th. The problem is we also have an outdated higher education system. It begins with the fact that we no longer do vocational training in America, and for the life of me, I don't understand why. Why don't we teach young Americans? Why don't we teach people in high school how to fix airplanes and cars, how to be welders and plumbers and electricians? You know what? These jobs pay a lot more than Greek philosophers make. And we can graduate people from high school ready to work in these careers. When I'm President of the United States, God willing, we will do what we did when I was Speaker of the Florida House. We will help more people enter vocational careers so when they graduate, they can find a job and they can support their families and have upward mobility. What unites us as a people is that every single one of us is but a generation or two removed from someone who made our future the purpose of their lives, and that's what makes us special. And if we ever lose that, we stop being special. And so the reason why I entered public service, why I ran against Charlie Crist in that Senate race, and why I run for president now is because I want us to still be that kind of country. Because I believe that if we do a few simple but important things over the next few years, not only will that journey still be possible, it will be possible for more people than it's ever been. And we will be able to leave for our children, not just a great country, but the greatest nation, greater than it's ever been. And we will be able to say that we were the authors of a 21st century that history will record was also an American century. This is the opportunity before us, and I hope we embrace it. Thank you for the chance to talk to you today. God bless you. Thank you.
But I hope you'll listen to what he says, because the record of Jeb Bush as governor of Florida is a record we should want for any Republican governor in the nation, any Republican president in the White House. Good judges, good schools, safe cities, and a thriving economy. So please give a warm welcome to my friend, the governor of Florida, Jeb Bush.
I am blushing, buddy. Thank you. The first thing the next president has to do is change the culture in Washington, D.C. We have to shrink the government workforce. Look, if you start with the premise that you want to make government smaller and more effective, then we need to make sure that the size of government itself begins to shrink. In Florida, when I was governor, we reduced the state government workforce by 13,000 people, 11%. We could do the exact same thing in relatively short order in Washington, D.C., because no one's even tried it in a long, long while. Simply by saying for 3 people that leave, most of them will be leaving by attrition, you replace it with 1, you get pretty close to 10% in a 4-year period. If you limit the number of contractors so that you're not just replacing a government worker with a contractor, like an Edward Snowden type person, if you shrink that as well, you begin to change the culture in Washington, D.C. Secondly, we need lobbying reform. It is incredible the number of lobbyists that exist today. First, I think that every meeting that a lobbyist has with a top staff official in Congress or in the White House, and certainly among elected officials, should be online within 24 hours. There should be a 6-year ban for elected officials once they finish their public service. If it is about public service, I think you'll appreciate why the ban should exist. If it's about public service, there should be a 6-year ban on making them have the revolving door to be lobbying their former colleagues. Those kinds of things begins to change the culture in Washington. And frankly, this apparently is controversial, but this is pretty commonplace in state legislatures across the country. If you don't show up to work as a member of Congress, you should not get paid. The second mission, if I'm elected president, is to change the conversation about this so-called new normal. You've heard it, I think. The new normal about economic growth. That our country can't grow the way it used to. Get over it. It's over. It's not possible to grow at 4%. We have to accept 2% of economic growth, that somehow that's the new normal. You know, the science has decided, this kind of language now that's used, it doesn't allow for healthy debate. The simple fact is we can grow at 4%, but it's going to require fixing some really big complex things. And if we do that, I promise you that people will be lifted out of poverty. And I promise you the middle class will get a raise for the first time in 15 years. This should be a lofty aspirational goal, but it is realistic to be able to do this. And the three things I want to talk to you about today, there are others as well that we need to do for sure, but the three I'd like to talk about relate to regulation, relate to taxation, and relate to embracing the energy revolution in our midst rather than trying to push it down. As it relates to regulation, it is stifling the ability for people to rise up. There are fewer businesses being started today than going out of business. Never happened in American history. We sit back and accept this? Of course we shouldn't. The reason why people aren't starting businesses is to start business as a non-incumbent costs an extraordinary amount of money. The confusion, the uncertainty, and the cost of regulation today is stifling the next generation of job creators. And we need to reverse that as fast as we can, and as president, I pledge to do just that. Third, we should shift as much power back to the states. When I just saw someone sent, Boston Globe did a story about a 11-page letter I wrote the previous president on his first month of office as a new governor of the state of Florida. 11 pages of suggestions of how to do exactly that. 9/11 kind of stopped that progress in place. It needs to be the highest priority of the next president, because I know for a fact, as governor of a state, a complicated state, you can build roads better, you can educate better, you can have the DEP, in my case, do their environmental issues better, doing water quality, air quality. All those things could be done much better at the state level and local level than in Washington, D.C. If you want to shrink regulation in Washington, shift the power back. One of my first objectives as President of the United States would be to pass the REINS Act. I don't know if you heard about it. This is where a rule is proposed, and if it costs more than $100 million, it has to go back to Congress, the elected officials, to be able to decide whether it's meritorious or not. Allowing unregulated bureaucrats to regulate us is not the right thing to do. We need to pull back that authority and make sure that our public elected officials are there. If we did that alone, it would release the animal spirits of our country, and we'd begin to see higher sustained economic growth. But we also need to recognize we have the most convoluted tax code in the world. It is stifling the ability of people to dream dreams anymore. For the incumbents, it's fine. You know, it's fine. Just if you ever fly to Dulles to go to the nation's capital, building after building after building of consultants, of accountants, of lobbyists, of lawyers, of defense contractors, they're doing great. The more complicated the world is, the more complicated the tax code is, the harder it is for the next generation of achievers to make ends meet, but the incumbents do quite well. We need to simplify the tax code, lower the rates as much as possible. You shouldn't have to get a lobbyist or get in line to be able to get your tax credit or your tax deduction. It shouldn't work that way. And if we're going to grow at 4%, we have to make a radical change, dramatically changing the tax code and letting people decide how they want to pursue their dreams, not getting in line and getting their snouts at the closer end of the trough, but be able to say, I got a great idea, and I know the rules as it relates to regulation, and I know what the tax rate's going to be. Let me go do it unencumbered by having to get in line in Washington, D.C. So tax reform is part of this. 2,000 pages of laws have created 9,000 pages of rules that is stifling this great dynamic country from doing what I know it will do. The third thing I would suggest to you is we need to be all in on the energy revolution. This should be a time when we have marching bands in this country celebrating the combination of things that are so uniquely American. Private property rights, creating a dynamic subsurface trading that allows for costs to go up and down based on demand. Entrepreneurs, private businesses in pursuit of better and better lower costs. George Mitchell, an immigrant, through trial and error took two existing technologies, horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing, and created a revolution. This administration, and if Hillary Clinton's elected, what she'll do is try to stifle this because of some hard-edged political agenda. The simple fact is, this is the path to high sustained economic growth, high wages, lower costs, lower utility bills, lower gasoline prices, reindustrializing the country, allowing us to use our energy to export so that the Russians don't hold Europe hostage in terms of natural gas. This is a place we should be celebrating and protecting it rather than pushing it down, which Hillary Clinton would do. Look, the final thing I'll say is leadership matters. It just matters. It matters a lot. It's not all about talking. It's not all about who can deliver a great speech. In fact, I can promise you this, if it's about delivering great speeches, I'm not going to be president probably. I can do it okay. I don't have a self-esteem problem here, don't get me wrong. But you've got to lead. We can't just keep electing people that do give great speeches. 2008 is living proof of that, isn't it? Soaring eloquence to fool people and then to carry out a progressive liberal agenda will doom this country. We have to have leaders that say what they're going to do and then do what they said they were going to do. You have to have knowledge that person has experience in having done it before. You have to know that a leader has a spine and a backbone. We saw this debate a couple of days ago, which was a lot of fun, and there were a lot of tough questions. And there's a candidate and a couple of candidates complaining that the questions were too tough. Well, you think that's tough. How about dealing with Putin? How about dealing with the challenges that exist in our country? This is nothing. You have to have leaders that are principled, that are courageous, that are servant-oriented rather than it's all about them. The big personalities on the stage matter nothing for a person that's stuck in poverty. They matter nothing for someone who's scared about the security of this country. They matter nothing at all for people that are stuck in the middle. We need leaders to be able to fix these big things, and when we do, this country will take off. And we need to be united, because Hillary Clinton is going to be Barack Obama's third term on foreign policy and third term on economic policy, and it will change this country. I, for one, don't want that to happen. And so my pledge to you is I'm going to fight hard. I'm going to fight with heart. I'm going to do this in a hopeful, optimistic way. I'm going to do my best not to tear down my opponents because I admire most of them, and I respect them all. I respect them all. And I know the only way you can win in I wasn't a calculus guy, but here's my math. The only way you can get to 50 to fix these things and restore America's greatness is to win, not to subtract. It's to add. It's to take what we have and build on it and go campaign in places where a conservative hasn't been in a long, long way. I'm going to go campaign in the Latino communities in Spanish and in English, and I'm going to say, join our cause. I'm going to go campaign in the black churches and say, I'm on the side of your children. We need to change and challenge these corrupt education systems that are keeping your children down. I'm for school choice across the board. Join us in our cause to liberate our education system. I'm going to go campaign on college campuses and say, how's this been working out for you for the last 6 years? Obamacare, you're needed to be healthy and young. You must be in the system so that guys my age, can get a better deal. How's that student loan thing working out for you? Recourse debt on your back where you can't even graduate because there's no reform of our higher education system. How's it working out where there's no jobs available for the degree that you might have gotten? I think we can win this in a principled way, but we're going to have to campaign not like this. We're going to have to campaign like this. Come our way, join our cause, fight for your own freedom.
She's a phenomenal speaker and a great American. I'm delighted to have Carly Fiorina with us.
So one of my first speeches, I was thinking about this today, one of my very first speeches, it was at CPAC. I know many of you were there. And I asked this question of Hillary Clinton. Mrs. Clinton, flying is an activity, not an accomplishment. Please name an accomplishment. And you know, we don't have an answer yet. We don't have an answer yet. Or then there was that Saturday morning when I was asked on a national television show whether I thought a woman's hormones prevented her from serving in the Oval Office. And my response was, gee, can anyone think of any instance in which a man's judgment might have been clouded by his hormones? Including in the Oval Office. I said, I'm a conservative because I know no one of us is any better than any other one of us. Each of us are gifted by God. All of us want to live lives of dignity and purpose and meaning. And I know that our values, our principles, and our policies work better to lift everyone up. It's also fair to say, as I said last night, that 2016 is going to be a fight, a real fight, between conservatism and the progressivism that has completely dominated the Democrat Party and that is now not only undermining the character of our nation, but crushing the potential of this nation. You see, progressives don't believe what I just said. They don't believe that no one of us is any better than any other one of us. In fact, if you look at their policies, if you look at how they talk about things, how they talk about people, whether it's what they're doing to defend Planned Parenthood or how they continue to support the teachers' unions, no matter what they say, the core message is this: some of us are smarter than others. Some of us are better than others. Some of you really can't live lives of dignity and purpose and meaning, but don't worry, some of us are going to take care of the rest of you. It is the height of disrespect and disregard, and it is the fight we must have in 2016. You know, sometimes we tend to think of politics as a game, as sport, you know, and everybody got ready for fight night last night. You know, it kind of feels like a sport and a game. The only thing is, of course, politics, while it sometimes can be fun like a sport or maybe disappointing like a sport, it's not a game. Because politics and politicians and the policies they pursue impact every single person's life. We are at a pivotal point in our nation's history. We must win in 2016. And in order to win, we're going to have a nominee who throws every punch, who will not ever pull her punches. We're going to have a nominee who will point out Hillary Clinton's lack of accomplishment. We're going to have a nominee who points out that she is not trustworthy. And yes, indeed, as I told Chris Matthews over and over again last night on MSNBC, she did lie about Benghazi, she did lie about her emails, and she did lie about her server. And we're also going to have a nominee who is prepared to take on every mythology of the Democrat Party, whether it's the war on women or they're the party who care most about African Americans or Hispanics or the poor. The truth is the Democrats have been bad. Bad for women, bad for African Americans, bad for Hispanics, bad for economic growth, opportunity, and respect in this nation. That's what we need to win this job. I can win this job. We need a president who understands bureaucracies, how to hold them accountable and cut them down to size, because the federal government has become one giant, bloated, corrupt bureaucracy. And we need We need somebody who understands technology, which is a great tool, but it's also a weapon that's being used against us. And finally, and perhaps most importantly of all, we need someone who understands what leadership is. Yes, it is sometimes a tough call in tough times with high stakes for which you are prepared to stand and be held to account. I have a track record of leadership, but the highest calling of leadership is to challenge the status quo. We need someone who can challenge the status quo of Washington, D.C., not someone who's been in the political process all their lives. The highest calling of leadership as well is to unlock the potential of others. We need a leader in the Oval Office who understands their highest calling is to unlock the potential of this great nation. With your help and your support, I will lead the resurgence of a great nation. Thank you so very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Governor Rick Perry of Texas.
Thank you, Eric. He's so good. Oh, man. Hey, I told Eric, I was up late last night. Not as late as I wanted to be, but it was Lincoln who insisted that the Capitol Dome be finished in the midst of the Civil War. It was a symbol of this undying devotion to the Union at that very, very trying time in our country. Lincoln was not one to suffer fools either. He was a powerful guy, whether it was the know-nothing movement that was occurring during his time that espoused this nativism that blamed immigrants for the troubles of the time, or whether it was Civil War generals that didn't get the job done. He just did not suffer fools well at all. But on the issues of his time, the grave injustice of slavery, a war of secession that claimed the lives of literally hundreds of thousands. He was a long-suffering, he was benevolent. He rose above the pettiness for the sake of the greater good. It is a powerful moment in time like those. And Lincoln set out to bind the wounds of this nation, declaring malice towards none, with charity for all. We who are running for president have a choice: to match him eye for eye with our own inflammatory rhetoric, or to turn the other cheek. And I will tell you, I don't believe the answer to this Democratic divider is to have a Republican divider. It's time for leadership that repairs the breach, that inspires Americans to dream again, to believe again, with policies that get our country working again. I want to share some important truths with you, starting with this truth. We do not have to settle for a world in chaos or an America that shrinks from its responsibilities. We don't have to apologize for American exceptionalism or Western values. We don't have to accept economic policies that leave behind the middle class and leave millions of Americans without even the hope of a job. We don't have to settle for crumbling bureaucracies that target our taxpayers and harm our veterans. And we don't have to resign ourselves to debt, decay, and slow growth. We have the power to make things new again, to project America's strength again, to get our economy going again. I'm running for president because I believe our best days as a nation are in front of us. I think we're just a few good policies and a leadership change away from the greatest days America has ever seen. We can do this. Our future is so bright, and I want to lastly leave you with this, and it's the reason that the conservative philosophy needs to be embraced by the same people that Abraham Lincoln helped free. The African American community ought to take a look at the last 40 years of the liberal policies and really have a a legitimate conversation about how that's turned out for them. Or they can look to a place like my home state. I don't think there's anything more powerful that I can tell a family than I'm going to graduate your child from high school and I'm going to let you keep more of your money. And there's going to be a job waiting for you. There's nothing more important than that I can tell them, that we care about you, that these conservative policies. In 2003, Texas was 27th in the nation in high school graduation rates, about in the middle of the pack. Not bad, big state, very diverse population, ethnically diverse. It's diverse geographically, it's diverse culturally and economically. So 27th in the nation is pretty good. High number of English as second language population in those schools. But I didn't think it was good enough. And we started putting policies into place starting in 2003. We had the largest incentive pay program for teachers in America. We expanded charter schools by a substantial margin. And we started testing our young kids in the 4th and the 8th grade in math and reading. So when we saw that they were having problems, we intervened quickly and were able to get them back on track. Let me tell you what the results of that was in a short 10-year period of time. Texas is now home to the second highest high school graduation rates in America. And if you are African American or if you are Hispanic, you are home to the #1 high school graduation rates for your ethnicity. That's what people care about. That's the kind of leadership that we can bring to this country. And oh, by the way, we did that without taking any of that race to the top, no child left behind, or Common Core. That's why America needs a president that trusts the people, that trusts the states. You elect me your president, and I will assure you the 10th Amendment will live again in the Oval Office in Washington, D.C. God bless you, and thank you for letting me come.
Friends, let me introduce to you my good friend, the senator from the great state of Texas, candidate for President of the United States, my good friend, Ted Cruz. Go get him, brother.
That was phenomenal. Wow! What an incredible array of candidates for president we have this year. I have to say, looking up and down that stage, seeing the young, dynamic, optimistic, forward-looking conservatives, it was powerful, it was inspirational. Then you have the Democrats. You know, I'm pretty sure the Democrats' debate consists of Hillary and the Chipotle clerk. Oh, look, that's not fair. That's not fair. Bernie Sanders has entered the race. So now the Democratic field consists of a wild-eyed socialist with ideas that are endangering America's place in the world, and Bernie Sanders. What I want to talk to you all about today is this is our time. I want to talk to you as leaders of the conservative movement. Red State is an incredible gathering. This is the 7th Red State. This is the 7th time I've been at Red State. I remember the first Red State at an Atlanta hotel with a gathering that wasn't much bigger than about this right here. The men and women who are here, y'all are leaders. Your bloggers, your journalists, your activists, your informed thought leaders. Every person sitting here touches hundreds, touches thousands, touches tens of thousands. Listen, I know it firsthand. I wouldn't be in the United States Senate if it were not for the men and women in this room, if it were not for the leaders at Red State. There's a reason when I launched my campaign for Senate, we did it on a conference call with bloggers. Because we understand the power of serious conservative thought leaders. And you know, for a long time, the conservative movement, we've been lamenting for decades, how come nobody will stand up? How come we elect one leader after another, they talk a good game, and then when it comes to the fight, when the shooting starts, they end up cowering under their desk. This is something that we've said over and over and over again. We've got to distinguish between campaign conservatives who on the campaign trail suddenly discover they're the most conservative soul to have ever lived. It is amazing what happens on the campaign trail. Have you ever noticed, last night on Cleveland, I'm pretty sure not a single person in the debate stood up and said, I'm an establishment moderate squish. I stand for nothing. Have you noticed that they run as us? That's how they run. By the way, they say if you're actually us, you're unelectable. But yet when they're running, they understand their message doesn't sell. The men and women in this room can play a critical role leading the conservative movement in assessing the records of every candidate running. I'm going to suggest to you a simple test. Each of you, I would encourage you, make a list of the 10 or 12 most important issues, the biggest fights of the last several years. And you decide, based on the issues that matter to you, whether it's fiscal conservative issues or social conservative issues or national security issues, constitutional issues, you make the list. And ask of every candidate running whether he or she has stood up and led on those issues in any meaningful way. On the Second Amendment, where were you when Harry Reid and Barack Obama tried to come after our right to keep and bear arms? On the Fourth Amendment, what have you done to stop the federal government from seizing the cell phone communications and emails of law-abiding citizens? On the 10th Amendment, where are you on Common Core? And have you always opposed it, or did you just magically oppose it the day you announced for president? On life, when have you stood and fought on life? On Planned Parenthood, how are you leading? And are you looking for a meaningless show vote, or do you actually want leadership to stop the atrocity that is what appears to be an ongoing criminal organization of Planned Parenthood? On Israel, what have you done standing and leading the fight to stand with Israel? On ISIS and radical Islamic terrorism in Iran, when have you stood and fought to lead? That's the test. Those are my dozen. But I'd encourage each of you, find your own dozen that you think are the biggest fights of the day and ask of every candidate, what's their record? What have they actually done leading on those issues? That's what the men and women in this room can do more effectively than anyone else, is dive down beyond the talking points to the actual records. You know, it matters because over and over again, we keep winning. And then we lose. We win elections. And then the people we elect don't do what they say. We were told, if only you can get the House of Representatives, things will be different. So in 2010, millions of Americans, led by the men and women in this room, rose up. We won the House. And virtually nothing changed. Then we were told, okay, the problem's the Senate. You guys don't understand. It's just a half of a third of the government. You can't do it with just the House. So we said, fine. Harry Reid's the problem. In 2014, millions of Americans rose up in an historic election. We won the Senate. We retired Harry Reid as majority leader. November 2014, we won historic majorities in both houses. What happened since then? The first thing that happened is the Republicans came back, joined with Harry Reid, and passed a $1 trillion cromnibus plan filled with corporate welfare and pork. Then the Republican majority voted to fund Obamacare, to fund President Obama's executive amnesty, to fund Planned Parenthood, and then Republican leadership led the fight to confirm Loretta Lynch as Attorney General of the United States. Here's one simple question. Which of those decisions is one iota different than it would have been with Harry Reid and the Democrats in the Senate? This is why we're frustrated. And this is why the men and women in this room have such an important role to ask of every candidate running. Don't just tell me how you've stood up to Democrats, particularly in a context that didn't really matter much. Show me when you stood up to your own party. Show me where you've stood up to Republican leadership and the Washington cartel and stood with the people. Let me tell you what I intend to do on my first day in office if I'm elected president. On January 20th, 2017, the first thing I intend to do is rescind every single illegal and unconstitutional executive action taken by Barack Obama. If I'm elected president, the second thing that I will do on January 20th, 2017 is instruct the Department of Justice to open an investigation into Planned Parenthood and to prosecute any criminal violations that are uncovered. The third thing I intend to do on January 20th, 2017 is instruct the Department of Justice and the IRS and every agency in the federal government that you will cease today persecuting religious liberty in this country. The fourth thing I intend to do on January 20th is rip up and rescind this catastrophic Iranian nuclear deal. And we will not win if we're afraid to speak the truth. To speak the truth with a smile, to speak the truth from love, but to speak the truth with absolute courage that the truth will set us free. The fifth thing I intend to do on January 20th, 2017 is begin the process to move the United States Embassy in Israel to Jerusalem, the once and eternal capital of Israel. And you know, candidates for president, Republicans and Democrats, have promised to do that over and over and over again. And when they get to the White House, one after the other doesn't follow through. Let me give you a very simple difference, I believe, between me and the other folks standing on that debate stage in Cleveland. With me, you know exactly what you're going to get, and I'm going to do exactly what I told you I would do. You know, the media and the Democrats, although I repeat myself, They love to tell us a conservative can't win. They say it over and over and over again. Here's their basic rule. Anytime you stand up for conservative principles, you'll get the living daylights beaten out of you. Democrats will attack you. The media will attack you. Republicans will attack you. And then they immediately say, well, if you've had the living daylights beaten out of you, then you can't be elected. That quickly reduces to we can only nominate someone who's never stood for conservative principles. And every time we do that, we lose. You know, I'll tell you, Heidi and I spent many months thinking about and praying whether to launch this campaign. Our daughters, Catherine and Caroline, they're 4 and 7. You don't lightly throw a young family into the maelstrom that is a political presidential campaign. The single biggest factor that led us to go forward is that we have to win this race. And as I look at the rest of the field, there are a lot of young, talented candidates who I like, who I respect, who are friends of mine. But I don't see a whole lot of candidates who I think can energize and mobilize and inspire and bring back the millions of conservatives, the evangelical Christians, the Reagan Democrats, the young people that we've got to bring back to win. And the reason we decided to run is that I believe I'm in the best position to energize and mobilize and bring back to the polls those millions of conservatives and to rebuild that Reagan coalition, to bring together conservatives and evangelicals and libertarians and young people and Hispanics and women and Reagan Democrats. That's how we win. We win standing with hardworking men and women, a populist campaign against the bipartisan corruption of Washington. When we launched the campaign, the New York Times said, "CRUZ cannot win because the Washington elites despise him." I kind of thought that was the whole point of the campaign. But here's the thing that's powerful, that's transformational. You know, the Times went on to say, okay, fine, maybe the grassroots will be with CRUZ. But he ain't going to have any money. Because the lobbyists in the Washington cartel, they control all the money, and all the lobbyists are with other candidates running because they're not going to rock the boat or end the gravy train. All of us filed our first fundraising reports a couple of weeks ago. Out of 17 Republican candidates running for president, you know which candidate raised the most hard money for the campaign? I'll give you one tweak to that. I didn't do that. You did. We raised $14.3 million in just over 3 months. Second place was Jeb Bush at $11.4 million. Now, if anyone would have said CRUZ was going to outraise every Republican candidate, including outraising Jeb Bush by $3 million, you'd have said I was stark, raving, bark at the moon nuts. But here's how we did it. We had over 175,000 contributions from all 50 states and all 5 territories. The average contribution was $68. We had people from all over the country go to tedcruz.org. 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 Here's an amazing statistic. We have donors in roughly half the zip codes in America. 48.1%. That is the power of the men and women in this room. That is the power of the grassroots. If we're going to beat the Washington cartel, the only way it's ever been done was in 1980, the Reagan Revolution that came from the people. If we do it together, if we stand up together, the only force strong enough to turn this country around is we the people. And that's exactly what we're going to do, because this is our time to take America back.
But she hasn't just endured, she shined. It is my pleasure to now have a conversation with my friend, the governor of South Carolina, Nikki Haley.
The Confederate flag has been flying since 1961. In 2000, there had been a compromise, very divisive, very angry, very hurtful, to the point that blacks, whites, Republicans, Democrats never wanted to revisit it. On top of that, it required a 2/3 vote of the House and a 2/3 vote of the Senate. So it was a massive hurdle that everybody knew was impossible to do. And so when I mentioned to Michael, I said, I think the flag needs to come down. He said, I think you're right. And so I called my staff, and on Sunday morning, I said, I want 4 meetings on Monday. I want to call in a group of Republicans, some who were involved in the compromise, and other leaders. I want to call in a group of Democrats. I want to call in some civic leaders, and I want to call in the federal delegation. Don't let anybody know what we're going to talk about. So when they walked in my office on Monday, they didn't know what I was going to ask. And what I said is, I'm going to have a press conference at 4 o'clock asking for the flag to come down. If you would stand with me, I will be forever grateful. And if you don't, I hold no ill will. I won't let anybody know you were in this room, and I won't go after you. And so truly, at 4 o'clock, the reason my husband was there is because I thought he might be the only one standing with me. But we saw some great things. I knew I was going to have some black leaders there. That was a given. But I had one senior Republican senator in specific. If you went into his office, it's all Confederate memorabilia. He voted not to bring the flag off the dome. He was staunch when it came to that heritage and what he wanted to protect. But he called one of my senior political advisors, and he said, are any Republicans going to be standing with her? And Tim said, I don't know. And he came and brought Strom Thurmond's son and made sure they were standing with me, because they wanted to make sure that there was a unified site in there. And so it said a lot. We went through the challenges of bringing down the flag. There were some people whose feelings were hurt and felt betrayed that I had asked for the flag to come down. These are not racist people. These are people who really see it as duty and honor and respect and heritage. You know this, that's what Southerners are. We value family, we value those people. And then there was another group that every time they saw it, they felt pain. And so it went through the Senate, and we only had 3 opposing. And I think the reason we only had 3 opposing was it was their Senate colleague that had died. So it had hit very close to home, and they understood that. We got to the House, and it was quite a different story. Because what had happened was I spoke to leadership, and they said, they're all for bringing down the flag, that's fine, but they're not going to bring down that pole. And I knew what they were saying, which meant they were going to put another Confederate flag up. They were going to put a different one up. And so I said, I need to go talk to the House caucus. And I went to the House caucus, and I said, you've never heard me talk about race, because it's not something I've ever needed to talk about, but I want to tell you a story. I said, when I was little, it was a big deal to drive to Columbia. I lived in Bamberg. It was a small southern town, a big deal to drive to Columbia. I'm the daughter of Indian parents. Only Indian family in a small town, 2,500 people. My father wears a turban. My mom at the time wore a sari. So people didn't know who we were, what we were, why we were there. And he always would stop at farmers' stands. He loved to stop at farmers' stands to pick up produce. So on our way home, there was a farmer's stand, and he stopped by there to pick up some produce. And I saw the panic on the woman at the register's face. And the next thing I knew, 2 police cars flew up very quickly. And they stood on either side of her and the other person that were there at the register. My dad kept going. My father's a very gracious man, very humble man. And he went up to them and he shook their hands and he said thank you and he paid for his produce and we got in the car. He didn't say a word on the way home because he was hoping I didn't notice. I didn't say a word on the way home because I was hoping his feelings weren't hurt. And I told the caucus, I said, that farmer stand is still there. And I pass it every time I go to the airport. And every time I see that stand, I feel pain. I said, no one should drive past our state house that represents everybody. No one should feel pain. And as long as that flagpole and that flag is there, we're excluding people in our state. And that's not what we do in South Carolina. So the House, I'm thankful it took several hours, but the flagpole is gone, and now the flag is gone.
But he was the former governor of Arkansas. He's been on TV and radio. He's running for president of the United States, and I was delighted that he said he would be here. Governor Mike Huckabee.
I'm glad to have survived the debate in Cleveland the other night. I thought it was an extraordinary opportunity for America to see that on that stage, there are a number of people who could be president of the United States, any one of which, in either of those stages, would far be better to lead this country and the world than the current occupant of the White House. But I got to thinking about the fact is I am old enough to remember when we cured polio in this country. I'm old enough to remember when the president said we're going to go to the moon and send a man there and bring him back within the decade. And I'm old enough to remember when we did it. I'm old enough to have grown up in the Deep South, a child during the time of Jim Crow laws, and to see when we no longer had separate entrances for people who were black or white to go into a restroom or to have a drink of water at a drinking fountain. And I've seen remarkable changes in progress and our attitudes toward each other based on things like race. I'm old enough to remember when we thought this country wouldn't survive because there were riots in the street in a divided country. And I'm old enough to remember when we thought this country couldn't survive because we didn't think we would be able to have enough energy to supply our needs and we were dependent upon Middle Eastern countries. We stood in line for blocks to get fuel at inflated prices. I'm old enough to remember when Jimmy Carter was president and how we lost the respect of countries around the world. But I'm young enough to also stand here today and to tell you that as a candidate for President of the United States, I believe that this country is far from being finished, and with the right leadership, this country can rise again to its greatest days, not its worst, so that my little 4-year-old grandson and all his other 4 cousins and sisters will be able to say America is still the place of the greatest dreams on earth. And that's why I am here today. And for me, the wing on the plane is the economy, jobs, getting America moving again. The other wing is national security, making sure this country is safe, making sure that we once again treat our friends like friends and our enemies like enemies, not the other way around. We don't have the relationship we once had. I've challenged some of my Democratic friends, and I actually have a few. Fewer and fewer as I continue this process. But I challenge them, I say, look, just tell me which country on this planet we have a better relationship with than we did when President Obama took office. They can't name one. There isn't one. Not even with Canada do we have a better relationship. Somebody said on the front row, Iran. No, we don't. We're being played the chumps. Folks, we don't have a better relationship with Iran. Our relationship is that we have trusted the untrustworthy. We have gotten in bed with terrorists. Thank God that Chuck Schumer, as a Democrat, has come out and said he will oppose the Iranian deal. Thank God for Chuck Schumer. But there's something else that a president had better be focused on, Because two wings of an airplane are critical, but it won't do anything but fly it to the crash site unless that airplane has steering mechanism. And the steering mechanism for this country is the moral foundation on which this nation is built, and we cannot live, survive as a nation without understanding the moral foundation for our existence. I unapologetically tell you that there is no explanation for this great country of ours apart from the providence of Almighty God. There is no other explanation for why we exist. I got down to the breakfast about 6 o'clock in the morning. I was the only one in there. And a guy was working, cleaning up the breakfast dishes and putting the stuff out on the little buffet. And because I was the only one in there, he recognized me, came over, we started talking. His name is Mark. Up until 3 years ago, Mark had worked for 25 years for a local manufacturing plant in Aiken, South Carolina. 3 years ago, that company went out of business and all 300 jobs were lost, shipped to Mexico. Mark was a college-educated accountant, worked for that company. He lost his jobs just like all the folks on the factory floor lost theirs. Now Mark is working the 6 a.m. shift at the Fairfield Inn in Aiken, South Carolina, along with 2 other part-time jobs. 3 part-time jobs, and he makes less money than he used to make in his 1 full-time job for a company that also gave him benefits and had him a pension. Mark's story is the story of too many Americans. The story of people who have lost their jobs and have been punched in the gut by policies that have sent our jobs somewhere else. One of the things that will transform this country, and it will never happen unless you have a president who will give the articulation to this issue and who will lead it and see it through, is to eliminate the current tax system that punishes productivity and rewards irresponsibility and passes the fair tax, a tax on our consumption. I am the only candidate in this race, and I don't like to say I'm the only candidate in this race who, but in this case it's very true. The only one who advocates that we don't need a reform of the Internal Revenue Service. We need an eradication of this criminal enterprise, the IRS. Our tax system cannot be fixed with a twist of the screwdriver or a tap of the hammer. The fair tax replaces all of the taxes that we currently have on corporate and individual income, rids us of the taxes on capital gains and savings and dividends and inheritances, and it replaces it with a simple consumption tax, which means that nobody pays taxes when they work or produce something. They pay taxes at the point of consumption, the point of sale, which means everybody's going to be in on the tax system. Now, I got a lot of pushback the other night for saying that it means everybody will be paying. And I use the term that it will also mean the gamblers, the prostitutes, the pimps, and the drug dealers. And everybody was startled that I would say something like that. Folks, I'm tired of paying my taxes and theirs. Let them pay theirs when they buy something, just like the rest of us. But the fair tax does something else. It brings capital and jobs back to the United States. There's $11 trillion of U.S. capital parked offshore. It's American money, but it's been moved out of America to keep it out of the hands of the IRS and the tax system. It's all legal. But I got a better idea. Pass the fair tax and tell me what happens when $11 trillion of working capital comes back into the United States. Do you think that'll goose the economy and give people jobs? We have lost 5 million manufacturing jobs in America since the year 2000. 60,000 manufacturing plants have closed in this country since the year 2000. And one of the reasons is because we tax labor and capital, which means that if you build a chair in North Carolina, by the time it gets to the showroom floor, 22% of the cost of that chair is embedded in invisible hidden taxes. You build that same chair in China, and China probably stole the design from the American company that originally designed it. They just copied it. Intellectual property theft that we don't enforce. They make that chair in China. It's not taxed in production. It's not taxed at export. It's not taxed when it's imported here. It sits on the showroom floor next to the one made in North Carolina. Guess which one costs less money? And we wonder why we're in an over $10 trillion trade deficit since 1990. And frankly, I'm kind of ticked off that we sent Republicans to Washington to stop executive overreach in things like Obamacare and immigration. And we turned around as Republicans and pushed to give this president more power in the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal to take more American jobs away from us. That is not going to build a great economy. As long as there is an advantage economically in illegal immigration, we'll never change it. And if people who are illegally working don't pay the same Social Security and Medicare tax and the income tax that you're paying out of your check, and the employer is not paying that out of his portion, there is an economic incentive to engage in illegal hiring practices. With the fair tax, nothing's taken out of your check. Nothing. And the employer doesn't have anything taken out either. And everybody pays when they pay at consumption. Guess what happens then? You rob out of the system the advantage of illegal immigration. Take away the economic advantage, you deal with the problem. Let me tell you what our priority ought to be. To make doggone sure that every person who comes back without an arm or a leg gets the treatment they need, and they aren't waiting months to get it through the VA system. That's who ought to have the priority in this great country of ours. But this country has also got to address the fact that we cannot continue as a nation and ever hope to invoke God's blessing if we continue to rebel against the most basic common decency of civilization. I know that there is a great move in this country, understandable, commendable, to stop all funding for Planned Parenthood, and I agree that we should. We should have never had it in the first place. That organization was created and founded by an absolute racist. Why anybody would want to associate with something Margaret Sanger had anything to do with is beyond me, and I wish we could get Hillary Clinton to defend her comments and her allegiance to Planned Parenthood. But let me be very, very clear with you. Stopping some federal funding for Planned Parenthood in no way absolves us of our responsibility to act like civilized people and to stop the slaughter of 4,000 unborn babies every day in this country, the 60 million who have died in the 42 years since the extreme court pretended that it was not just the Supreme Court but the supreme being, and believed that it could somehow suspend the very basic laws of our country, and most importantly, suspend the 5th and 14th Amendment for unborn people and declare that they no longer have due process nor equal protection, and allow them to be killed for no purpose other than economic consideration or for social convenience. My friend, it is time for us to invoke the 5th and the 14th Amendment and say that this is not an issue about funding, this is not an issue about privacy, this is an issue about the personhood of every human being, and that person should be protected under the 5th and 14th Amendment, and I pledge to you I will do it. Per capita income went up 50% in that state. If somebody wants to argue about my conservative credentials, you put my record against the headwinds I fought against the Clinton machine. I'm here to tell you today, I fought it, I beat it, and most importantly, by gosh, I live to tell about it, and that alone is good reason to give me your vote for President of the United States.
I give you the governor of the state of Wisconsin, Scott Walker.
Hillary Clinton earlier this year went after me and other governors who signed into law voter ID requirements to show a photo ID. She's out of touch with the vast majority of everyday Americans, not just Republicans or conservatives, but Americans who understand that you should have a law that says it's easy to vote but hard to cheat, and that's why we have a photo ID requirement. Hillary Clinton is going to claim that she's got the upper hand when it comes to foreign policy. But think about that. Hillary Clinton, think about that. Everywhere in the world that Hillary Clinton has touched is more messed up today than before she and the president took office. Hillary Clinton should not be our commander-in-chief. And it's not just about her leadership or lack thereof at the State Department. Think about those emails she was doing while she was Secretary of State. You know, the emails where she claimed they didn't have classified information in them, and yet there was. The American people can't trust Hillary Clinton. As I said the other night, sadly, it's likely that the government in Russia and China knows more about Hillary Clinton email server than do the members of the United States Congress, and that has put our security at risk. Hillary Clinton could be the deceiver-in-chief, but we cannot trust her to be the commander-in-chief. And there's plenty more things, and I'll touch on it in a minute, but think about it then. So the question is not just who we nominate for president as the Republican side, but who's best equipped to make sure that Hillary Clinton is not the next president. And I would argue to you, there's a lot of great people. You saw many of them the other night, first on one part of this, or one stage earlier in the night, and then the others joined with me, 9 others, and there are a great group of Republicans. Some of the best we've had since 1980. In fact, you saw the other night, I'm from the Midwest, I'm Midwestern night, I didn't spend my time talking about the other Republicans. You see, they're not our opponent, Hillary Clinton is. And sometimes people confuse that. But I want to tell you why I'm the best candidate to take on Hillary Clinton, because I realize there are people from all across this area, and so I'm going to make the risk of referencing a Homer reference for me. You see, my favorite football player is a guy who plays football in my state. He was last year the NFL's MVP, Aaron Rodgers. You see, Aaron Rodgers doesn't talk trash. He lets himself show his work on the field. Not by how he trash talks others. He shows what he does on the field to play. And I would argue to you that I'm the best candidate to take on Hillary Rodham Clinton, because I don't just talk about it. I fight and I win, and I have a record of accomplishments in a blue state, and I did not compromise my principles to get it done, unlike anybody else out there. Where we'd be 4 years into a Walker presidency. And it's simple. It's about 3 simple ideas: reform, growth, and safety. Reform is about taking power from Washington and putting it into the hands of the hardworking taxpayers in states all across this great country. Growth is about helping people, not the government, helping people create a better economy so that everyone can live their piece of the American dream. And safety is about protecting your children and your grandchildren from radical Islamic terrorism and all of the threats in this world. When we talk about reform, for me, it's about taking, not just saying you're going to take power out, but taking power and money when it comes to everything from Medicaid to transportation to infrastructure to environmental protection, yes, even education, money, and power out of Washington and sending it back to our states. And in the cases of our education system, sending it right back to our schools. Because I don't believe in Common Core or statewide or a nationwide school board. Send the money and power back to the people at the local level. You see, Hillary Clinton thinks you grow the economy in Washington. Last year alone, 6 of the top 10 wealthiest counties in America, you know where they were? In and around Washington, D.C. For the rest of us in America, we understand that people create jobs, not the government, and we need to help people in cities and towns and villages all across this country live their piece of the American dream. Secondly, we need to rein in the out-of-control federal regulations that are like a wet blanket on the nation's economy. You saw it the other day with the EPA. It cost my state alone something like 20,000 manufacturing jobs with what I call the costly power plan. We need to rein that in so that we can move the economy going forward for small businesses and farmers and ranchers and others out there. Third, we need to have an all-of-the-above energy policy that takes advantage of the abundance of what God has given us here on this country and on this continent. We are an energy-rich country. We need to start acting like it. Fourth, we need to help people get the education and skills that they need to succeed. in careers that pay far more than the minimum wage. Let Hillary Clinton talk about how low wages are going to be. We're going to talk about how we lift everyone up with the education and skills that they need to succeed. I'm proud of what we did to reform public education in my state. We now have the second best ACT scores in the country. Why? Because we took power out of the hands of the big government special interests, the big government union bosses, and put it firmly in the hands of the hardworking taxpayers and the people they elect to run their schools. We got rid of seniority and tenure. We can hire and fire based on merit. We can pay based on performance. We can put the best and the brightest in our schools. We need to be able to do that all across America. We've got a president who drew a line in the sand and allowed it to be crossed. A president who called ISIS the JV squad, Yemen a success story, and Iran, a place we can do business with. I don't know about all of you, but I still remember my brother and I tying ribbons around the tree in front of our house during the 444 days that Iran held 52 Americans hostage. Iran is not a place we should be doing business with. If I am your president, I will terminate the deal with Iran on the very first day in office, reinstate the sanctions, put in place even more crippling sanctions, and convince our allies to do the same. Iran is not a place we should be doing business with. And we need to honor our men and women in uniform by giving them the resources that they need to keep us safe and the protection they need to keep themselves safe here on American soil. And then we need to give them the quality and timely health care that they deserve when they return home. We need to honor our veterans. It is a disgrace with the VA today. We need to honor our veterans. Because I believe it's more than just putting a Republican in office. We need a reformer, someone who will fight and win and get results without compromising our common sense conservative principles going forward. If you elect me as your president, I will fight and win for you and every other American in your family every single day I'm in office. Thank you for coming out. God bless you, and let's take some questions.